Okay, hello and welcome to our first digital talk, the future of performing arts and culture in Europe after the COVID-19 crisis. This event is organized by Òmnium Cultural and will be moderated by me, Alex Miquel. We first want to thank our viewers on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter for staying with us today. We also encourage you to send questions to our speakers during the show. They will try to answer them at the final part of the show. On YouTube, you can do it by writing your question in our live chat. On Facebook and Twitter, you can comment on this event post or tweet. You can also send us a direct message. Okay then, I'm now going to give the floor, or I should say the screen, to Roger Sebastià, member of the board of Òmnium Cultural. Roger, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon. Today, Òmnium Cultural, a non-profit with more than 180,000 members devoted to promoting and protecting the Catalan language and culture, is starting a series of digital talk to discuss the more relevant social impacts of the COVID-19 virus crisis. With this initiative, we have sought to bring together experts, representatives of key institutions, and some of the main groups affected to share their thoughts and discuss proposals that will help create more resilient communities where basic rights and access to culture are guaranteed. To kick off this series, today we are focusing on the heavy negative impact that the crisis has had on the cultural sector, and especially on the performing arts. All cultural activities that require people to gather in groups, be they actors, stagehands, or the audience, have been cancelled, and the theaters and concert halls won't be able to reopen for many months yet. The shock for the unexpected halt in all arts activities that had been long scheduled and the uncertain immediate outlook draws a bleak future for the creative class, as well as for those who program cultural events and for the fans who regularly go to the theater, concerts, dance performances, or circus arts all across Europe. Òmnium Cultural, as an NGO that has kept watch over culture since it was founded in 1961, is well aware of the dire situation, and especially the huge challenge now facing the performing arts because of the pandemic. With the goal of hearing about the most pressing needs in the cultural sector across Europe and the possible measures that can be taken to alleviate the challenges faced by the arts and cultural community, we are honored and delighted to present to you our guests. They are Ms. Åsa Rikersdotter, Secretary General of the International Network for Contemporary Performing Arts, who will tackle the topic of the current and future situation of artists in the framework of the COVID-19 crisis. Ms. Tere Badia, Secretary General of Culture Action Europe, who will address what public policies are now needed to overcome the effects of the COVID-19 crisis on Europe's cultural sector. And Ms. Barbara Gessler, Head of Unit of Creative Europe at the European Commission, who will explain the EU's response to the crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic in the cultural industry. I would like to thank all of the speakers today for taking time during these challenging times to participate in today's digital talk. Before we move to the Q&A section of our talk, I will touch upon the role that NGOs and non-profits like Òmnium Cultural can play in the cultural sector during these times of traumatic crisis. Many thanks for tuning in today. We hope you find this initiative interesting and helpful, and that you will follow the future digital talks that we are preparing. I turn you over to our moderator, my colleague, Mr. Alex Miquel. Thanks.
Thank you, Roser. Well, so as Roser said, our first speaker today is Òsa Rikersdotter, Secretary General of the IETM, the largest international network in performing arts. She has led a versatile career in the performing arts, culture, academia, banking, politics, and media. And she will speak to us from Reykjavik, Iceland, to tell us how she sees the current situation and which are the future prospects for the sector. The floor is yours, Ausa.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I am, as you said, speaking from my native country, Iceland, where I took one of the last flights from Brussels at the end of March. And Icelandair has still not resumed their flying, so I have no idea how I'm going to get back. I'll probably have to catch a boat or something. But you asked me to speak about the situation of the performing arts, and I am happy to do so. We at IATM are seeing various trends, which I will go over shortly. One of them, and the first one really, is that we are seeing immediate unemployment across Europe of thousands of artists and other professionals who are losing income due to closures of venues and festivals and theaters and centers and schools where they teach, and the list goes on. So that is like the immediate fact, because as you know, the performing arts was one of the first ones to be hit with the closure of all events across our continent and throughout the globe. What we are also seeing is that the benefits and the measures in countries and in regions vary a lot. The best case scenarios, we are seeing national governments taking immediate measures in order to safeguard the loss of income of artists. And in the worst case scenario, we are seeing no measures whatsoever being taken, and then everything in between. So what has become very clear in our investigation is that artists, in very many cases, do not qualify for various national emergency schemes that have been put up, either because their income is too low or their status as a freelancer is not clear, and for other reasons. And this is already and still creating a huge problem in various parts of Europe, and is very likely to continue to be so. What we at IATM did right at the beginning of the lockdown is that we did a survey. And I'd like to tell you about the sort of 5 takeaways from the survey that we did, which I feel are still very valid today, although it's a month and a half or more since we did this. Basically, the first takeaway that we found was that supporting artists means rescuing the entire performing arts ecosystem. The performing arts are hit very, very hard, and their international aspect is in particular under pressure. The frozen link between audiences is as detrimental as the economic links. We are seeing a bottom-up solidarity, which is enormous and tangible throughout the continent. And fifthly, the live component of the performing arts must remain alive, even and especially today. And I'd like to elaborate a little bit on these 5 points. And first, the support of the artists. I think we have to acknowledge that artists are at the bottom of the entire value chain. And if they are left without support, the whole culture ecosystem will fall apart. And thankfully, we have seen various groups and institutes addressing this throughout this period. And only yesterday, a group of parliamentarians addressed this, which I'm sure Barbara will be telling us more about later. And this is that finding ways of supporting the artists, and particularly those that are not being addressed, and the groups that are not being addressed in the national schemes, and that are falling through the cracks, we need to find a way of addressing their issues. We are certainly seeing that the performing arts are being hit hard. Perhaps it is the artistic sector that is the hardest hit for the obvious reasons of all these closures of venues. And we have to take into account when we're talking about the arts in general in Europe that we have a culture sector that employs around 8.6 million people. And there the performing arts without music is the largest sector, employing around 1.2 million people. So we're talking about a very sizable part of our economy, which is at risk. And Creative Europe is needed to be more vital in the future in the term of supporting the international component, because what we are seeing all over Europe, across Europe, that national governments are taking funding that used to be earmarked for international cooperation and putting it into emergency measures. You could say that is a natural thing to do, but it can have very dire consequences, and it's a very dangerous trend for the European Union as a whole. The third thing, the frozen link with the audience, is something that I feel is a little bit still overlooked in today's dialogue. Maybe because we're still, really, living day by day and trying to figure out our existence. But this frozen links, if it's going to continue for months, like you said earlier, Rosier, what is it going to do for the cultural life of Europe? I mean, how is the cultural life of Europe going to look like? And how are we going to address this joint, hugely important part of our everyday life in the future? It's something that I think we need to talk about much more. On a more positive note, I mentioned the bottom-up solidarity, and this is something that we at IATM have been feeling extremely strongly. We immediately had very, very high attendance and member engagement and engagement from outside of our network in all the very many events that we have been organizing, and we decided to keep those events open for anybody. So it's not just the IATM members, which are a large group of 500 organizations and thousands of individuals behind them. So we have really been seeing this bottom-up solidarity in such a beautiful way, manifesting itself in so many ways. And that's been a wonderful thing to experience. And in general, the resilience and the generosity of the sector is incredible. We've all been seeing artists across the globe creating work for free for their online audience. And every single day we have a large availability of all sorts of beautiful arts. But which brings me to my last point, I think we have to also take into account that although we are able to do a lot of things digitally, and only this weekend, we have been seeing some very great initiatives being made by festivals like the Airwaves Network just had its festival on this weekend, all live through the digital means. But it's never going to replace the live experience. And because we've been hearing and feeling the sort of more and more increasing dialogue about digitalization of the performing arts. So we spontaneously sent out a survey to our membership, asking them what they felt about it. And overwhelmingly, the response was that digitalization will never replace the live experience. And for the performing arts, it is our uniqueness, the live experience that we are able to give our audience and the world. And that's nothing is going to replace that. Just a little bit in the end about the future. Of course, I cannot predict the future like anybody else, but I think it's highly likely that we will see a change in our sector. We will very likely see some structures that will not survive this pandemic. But, and I want to end with that, we are also seeing a different sort of dialogue happening within the performing arts. People are wanting to sort of question how we run our organization, how we cultivate our sector. And on that note, ITM is now going to start a very large sort of brainstorm project we call Rewiring Our Network, which is going to start on the 19th of May, where we're going to look towards how we work as a network, but also make our contribution towards how we feel the entire global performing arts sector could look like. And we're going to allow ourselves to dream in that project and pretend we're all together, ask the questions that we need to, but also try our very best to come up with solutions for our sector, because at the end of the day, I think the performing arts of Europe are strong, resilient, and they will find a way out of this. But the support of society is very much needed. And we hope that we will all do our utmost to secure that in the future. So I think I'll end with that. And then, of course, if there are any questions, please send them to us.
That you were mentioning that people could send us questions. Actually, I would like to inform you that right now we are more than 300 people watching this event, and some of the people have asked if this event will be available afterwards, once this event has finished. The answer is yes. Actually, you can go back to YouTube or also to our Twitter or Facebook accounts and watch it again. Actually, you'll see that there is an information bar just in the bottom of the screen where you can see our international Twitter account. So if you cannot watch it now, you will be able to do it later on. So that said, now is Tere Badia's turn. She is Secretary General of Culture Action Europe. She's devoted her professional career to cultural research and production in various formats, carrying out several studies on cultural policies, networks, and R+D+I for visual arts, or curating exhibitions and projects for contemporary art. Tere, I'm sure that you've got a lot to say about the needed policies to overcome the current crisis. So the floor is yours.
So first, thank you. Bona tarda a tothom. Thank you, Òmnium, for inviting us to your first digital talk. I think in times like this, it is absolutely important to open these dialogues and these collective reflections, as I was saying just a couple of minutes before, because we are in a sector, not only in a sector, we are in a moment of huge challenges. And I think only an open and sincere dialogue between cultural actors, civil society organizations, public bodies can bring us a bit forward and in a better perspective. So thanks for opening this space. I'm going to talk a bit in a more generalistic way. So Culture Action Europe is a cross-sectorial network, cross-European network. So we're of course, so we have a lot of diverse sectors represented in our network. So my approach is going to be a bit more general because, that's our main focus. So I think that COVID it's unfolding a huge and showing us the huge interdependence of our world. We are living in an interdependent world. And at the same time, it is showing us the weakness of the social and economical structures we have been building upon our way of life. So COVID is also having an impact on every dimension of our lives, including the cultural sector all around the world. As was mentioned before, the reaction of the cultural sectors to this crisis is absolutely overwhelming. Cultural organizations and institutions, but also individual artists, cultural professionals are making enormous efforts to maintain activities that are helpful to ease people's feeling of isolation, to contribute to our well-being, and to increase also our sense of community in these very difficult days of confinement. So all sorts of cultural proposals are supporting this resilience of the individuals and communities, both online in a wider scale and offline at the intimacy of our houses and in the very, very little social space left by the COVID-19. Cultural proposals also underpins our community life through the collective constructing and experiencing this unexpected reality for the most of us. Some of these cultural practices are beyond doing things beyond this. They are also building our capacities to start imagining what comes after this challenging situation. They bring inspiration through poetics, that's what they do, cultural practices, and reflection through its actions and proposals to rethink the world and our relation to it. Yet, it is true that cultural and creative sectors are among the most hardly hit sectors by this unprecedented situation. It was mentioned before, 8.4 million of persons working in the cultural and creative sectors are affected also by this, deeply affected by this crisis. And with almost 80% of the venues, the museums closed, all the festivals, popular activities cancelled, the cultural organizations are already impacted both by the immediate economical and social consequences. But on the other side, and as you would say before, most of the cultural creators are severely affected by the discontinuation of their exhibitions, their performance opportunities. Yes, we all know that it is a sector characterized by self-employment, freelancing, job intermittence. This is combined also with little or absolutely no access to social protection. And the loss of income in the next months poses a direct and immediate threat to the existence of artists, performance, and many other cultural operators and organizations who had been already struggling with a precarious situation well before the current emergency. This is not new, but this is this crisis, this situation has made this precariousness even harder. I want to include here two reflections on the cultural sector, because we have to also consider two approaches to face the huge challenges in front of us. The first, that it's clear that we are in a change of paradigm, I think. This is a real one. So in the immediate future, this specific period will transform the life of cultural institutions and the shape of cultural activities and projects. We will have to learn to live without public, without participants, and with a drastic drop of visitors. So in this sense, and as in other aspects of social and economical life, we as cultural actions, we have also a responsibility to rethink everything, as we might be in a change of paradigm. This is a fundamental responsibility, because we have to reflect on the way we live, work, produce, consume, and relate to the culture and to the rest of the world. And we are asked to build back better our practices upon the scars left by this crisis, that's for sure. But on the other side, and too often in the past, culture has been the first to be compromised by political decisions, and of course the consequent budget. And we cannot accept that this happens again, because we cannot afford it. We cannot afford it. We must call for the inclusion of cultural perspectives in the dialogue with the social, economical, and environmental actors for sustainable and equitable development, if we want to rebuild the social issue in diversity and in solidarity. But secondly, of course, we have this change of paradigm, but of course we need immediate support actions on different levels, because the negative consequence of this crisis will affect the viability not only of the cultural life of all of us, but the very much existence of those working in culture. So it's true, the cultural sector itself has mobilized very fast to directly help artists and cultural professionals who lost their income. European cultural networks, national associations and organizations gathered and are sharing abundant information about emergency support measures available for the sector. National, regional, and local governments have adopted emergency initiatives and measures across Europe. And well, in many countries where such measures are not yet put in place, it is true that the cultural and creative sectors has mobilized themselves and asked their governments to take a specific action to adequate the support for the cultural life and cultural ecosystems. And at the European level, the European Commissioner responsible for culture, Maria Gabriel, has taken the lead to support the sector by announcing the 7 sector-specific measures. Probably Barbara Gessler is going to talk or introduce some of these measures afterwards. But we also expect that culture is included in the European Union social and economic horizontal measures already adopted by the European Commission. So the three of them. So the coronavirus response investment initiatives, the support to mitigate unemployment risk and emergency, and the temporary framework for state aid and emergency. So this should consider that culture is also, it's a fundamental part of society. So they should be, it should be addressed also in this economic and social horizontal measures. But finally, and Osmond, now it's the agenda, it's the European agenda. They are discussing again the European budget. So the utmost priority should be to ensure that culture it's included in an ambitious multi-annual budget for the European Union. Of course, regarding the cultural sector, there is a strong need to strengthen the Creative Europe program. We always repeat it since years, double the budget. And of course, given that Creative Europe does not cover the whole needs of the sector, we recall the pledge for mainstreaming culture across other programs, with at least 1% dedicated for culture across the whole budget. We think that if we fail to support culture in this time of crisis, it will result in a potential irreversible losses of creators, artists, cultural professionals. It will damage many cultural practices, resources, and organizations. And without a specific support, there will be a considerable deterioration in the richness and diversity of the manifestations of culture. But beyond this strict sectorial approach, we think that neglecting culture at this crucial point can have enormous consequences for the whole societies. One of the best abilities of artists is dealing critically with uncertainty. And these are 100% uncertain times. That's the only thing that we have, that we know for sure. Also, welfare, solidarity, and sustainability are intrinsic values of collective cultural practices. And these qualities must be placed at the center of the short-term and long-term policies. Of course, as well, making international cooperation. We live in a global world, so that this is clear. This is absolutely, definitely clear, and after the spread of this virus, so we need cultural cooperation that is central to build more resilient communities. So it is absolutely necessary to reinforce the cultural rights among the fundamental rights, to ensure plurality. It is necessary to include culture explicitly into the plans and instruments around the European Green Deal, the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. So more than ever, we need to embrace and support cultural concerns in our collective response to the crisis and the planning for the recovery, because we all have to live in the future world. So I'm going to leave it here. So thank you very much for hearing.
Tere. Okay. In this context, we know that the role of the European institutions will be paramount to overcome the crisis. For this reason, we have invited today to our talk Barbara Gessler, Head of Unit of Creative Europe, and Susanne Holman, Team Coordinator of Cultural Policy, both within the framework of the European Commission. The first, Barbara Gessler, is responsible for the Creative Europe subprogram at the Directorate General Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. The latter, Susanne Holman, will join us in the questions and answers turn if you have any questions for her on cultural policy. Barbara, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to this hangout. It's my first, so I'm quite excited, even though I'm aware that the situation we are in is not one to rejoice. So thanks very much for introducing me. I'm responsible for the culture program, which is part of the Creative Europe program. You know that the culture program is one sub-program covering all the sectors that are not audiovisual. And I want to stress this because we are dealing in the culture sub-program with all the sectors, not only performing arts. The other part of our program is the media program that deals specifically with film. And obviously you may be aware, and you are partly also touched by this, obviously the audiovisual sector is also very hard current situation. Just to mention, the Creative Europe program touches upon its end at the end of this year, and Tere rightly mentioned it. We are currently negotiating the future generation of programs, so we are looking ahead at follow-up to Creative Europe as of 2021. And as you can imagine, we're very much looking also forward to taking up the negotiations in the course of the year, to be able to have a program towards the end of the year, so we can start with Creative Europe 2021 in time, so as not to have a gap. I would like to say very briefly a little bit what is guiding our work at European level. Obviously, Asha and Tere also mentioned it, but of course, at the European level, for us, what's important is the cross-border mobility and the distribution of artistic works, obviously, as well as the free flow of ideas. All of this is central to the European project because all of this contributes to the two overarching priorities that we have when it comes to culture at the European level. One is to sustain and to promote cultural and linguistic diversity at the European level, and also reinforcing the competitiveness of the European cultural sectors at the European level. So these are the two mission mandates that we have that guide our work, and that is also, of course, important to keep in mind in our talk today. In 2018, we have issued the so-called New European Agenda for Culture, which designed the principles of our policy, and our funding is aligned with these principles. And amongst others, and I would like to stress that the agenda also very clearly emphasizes that there's an important role for culture to play in society and in the social context. And it also stresses very much what we know and what you have mentioned previously, the relevance of participating in culture for the individual and for a society. I can relay, obviously, and you have witnessed it yourself, that the Commission is very much worried about the situation that the sector is facing, and our Commissioner responsible for culture, amongst others, Maria Gabriel, is very much committed to making this point and to supporting the sector. In that vein, I would like to say we are, of course, very much in contact with the member states on the different measures that they take, and also we are observing the difficulties that they themselves are also facing. Tere and Asa have mentioned parts of it. You may know that on the 8th of April there was an informal ministerial conference that took place as an exchange platform. We are obviously also in touch with many of our networks and stakeholders. And we are being asked, and we are following up very concretely on the creation of supporting mechanisms in terms of giving platforms for exchange of best practice and experiences. I think this is typically something where Europe is rightly called for, and we are working on launching such platforms very quickly. So on the current COVID-19 crisis and the subsequent lockdowns, you have mentioned it. We have seen that what is our raison d'être and your raison d'être, mainly the free exchange of cultural works and professionals has virtually been brought to a halt. And while we know that all the sectors have been hit, we are also aware that on the performing arts sector, the consequences were particularly devastating, both artistically and economically, for everything which is live. Not only have performances been cancelled for months and depriving performers and venues, festivals and audience of real life encounters, but of course, you know, that rehearsals and new creations and artists in residence programs, etc., are currently not possible. So we are seeing all of this. I would like to very briefly say a few words about the horizontal measures that the Commission took very quickly. and that Tere already announced. First of all, there's the so-called Corona Response Investment Initiative that the Commission has launched, which consists of 33 billion euros from the structural funds to alleviate the impact of the pandemic. This instrument should give maximum flexibility to the member states to reallocate financial resources to areas of greatest needs, which of course includes the culture and creative sector. And in this case, for example, the European Social Fund could support short-term working arrangements by covering part of the salaries of workers who became technically unemployed because of the closure of business. However, I must stress that this is, of course, member states' decision how to use those funds available for them. Tere also mentioned that there is the temporary framework for state aid measures, where explicitly culture was mentioned as one potential area of application. There were only few, and culture and creativity were part of those mentioned. And a few countries have already announced that they have already turned to the Commission and asked for such a possibility, Denmark and Sweden, and the Commission has been able to validate these requests, and we are certain that more countries will make use of this possibility. And last but not least, as the third horizontal measure the Commission has been reacting in is the so-called unemployment risks in an emergency situation support, which is called SURE, SURE, which consists of 100 billion euros. And this is designed to help protect jobs and workers affected by the coronavirus pandemic. And there again, it's up to the member states, obviously, to make sure that the best possible use of this instrument is made in favor and to the benefit of creators and artists and writers. So we hope that this instrument will be swiftly adopted so the cultural sectors may be able to benefit of it. I would like to say a few words about the program for which I am working, Creative Europe. First of all, of course, we have said, and that is of course only valid for those that are happy enough to already be beneficiaries of Creative Europe funding, is that we have been very adamant about using the greatest level of flexibility when it comes to project support, everything which basically, in a nutshell, everything which is possible within the financial regulation, we will be able to do it. So projects need not fear if events that they were planning are either postponed, delayed, or may even have to be replaced by something else. We have also adopted a number of deadlines, of course, that we're currently ongoing in order for those that are interested to put them in a situation where they can apply even if going to the post office has become a major challenge in the current situation in some countries. I think it's very important, even though it doesn't maybe sound overly dramatic, ambitious, but we have been able, the executive agency has been able to speed up the selection procedures for the cooperation call. You know, this is the last cooperation call under this program, and we are speeding up currently this award decision procedure just to make sure that we can very quickly, for those who have been selected, also design and establish the contracts, and then very quickly the pre-financing that comes with this support should be very quickly reaching the sector. And in that sense, I think this is a very concrete instrument of immediate relief. We have also, even though it's not very relevant maybe for all of you more interested in performing arts, also topped up slightly the literary translation scheme, because I think we are all aware of the current relevance of literature in these times of confinement, and translation is the only instrument which brings us books from other countries and other languages also into our homes, and be able to benefit of the beauty of our literature. But the most important thing that I would like to mention today is that we were actually lucky enough that in our current program 2020, our work program, we had foreseen to launch a call regarding specifically the performing arts sector. We hope that we will be able to launch this call still in May, and surely you will understand that I'm not now in a position to give you details of what this call will entail, but I can give you some overriding principles and underlying ideas. You know that we have launched last year the so-called Opportunus mobility scheme for individuals, and this action mainly aims now at facilitating, should mainly aim at facilitating the cross-border distribution of European performing arts works. So as a complement to the individual mobility, we're aiming at having support for the circulation of works. But I need to stress, obviously, that we are under the influence, very quickly reacting also to the current situation, looking at both aspects of such a circulation or distribution rather, be it digital or physical, because we are obviously aware that, you know, the unique and collective experience of live performance cannot be matched, and you have mentioned it and I've witnessed it myself, cannot be matched by online viewing of film performances, for example. But it is also true to say that digital has proved a very useful tool and substitute during this containment period, by bringing a variety of existing performances and even new creation to larger audiences. It has been this link to the audience that several of you have mentioned, and it was a digital experience. So why are we looking in particular at the performing arts sector now, not only under the impression of the crisis, but in general? It's because obviously we know that while it's a very rich and diverse sector in Europe, and it's therefore also a major asset for all of us and for the whole of society in Europe, there are still a number of very critical obstacles to the cross-border circulation of performing arts works, which is a market fragmentation, sectorial fragmentation, but very importantly also linguistic barriers, for example, in theater, but also travel costs, logistic costs, insurance, copyright issues, etc. All of those aspects actually hamper performing arts works from crossing their national border. And this leads obviously to fragmentation of access as well. And therefore, the sector cannot fully develop the benefit that it in theory has, and in practice locally, regionally and nationally for the whole of the society. So all of these ambitions when it comes to social or economic and integration terms, this is not possible without support, we feel. And of course, the competitiveness aspect that you mentioned earlier, and also that we are looking at as part of our mandate, is also an important factor why we are looking at this. And of course, we eventually aim at reinforcing our common and shared values and our common and shared cultural heritage. So we feel that performing arts is an important aspect in this. And I would also like to raise in this respect that what Tere mentioned, it's very important also we see the contribution that the performing arts sector can make to one of the major Commission priorities, which is the concern for sustainability and ecological concerns. So we feel that this should therefore be more reflected in this call. And we are therefore launching this call very soon, a distribution call, in order to be able to help our networks cross borders and complement other existing distribution and support mechanisms also at other levels. And we obviously feel that this call will then be able to sustain the resilience and in particular the recovery of the sector after the crisis and help re-up all the potential it has. There will be several elements in this call. First of all, there will be a map currently exist and what we could currently learn from at the European level. There will be an actual pilot phase with the implementation of real actual distribution projects. We are also looking at this call to help us find policy recommendations to further develop our policy in this area. I would also like to briefly mention that we are very much committed also to the theatre sector in particular this year, where we will launch a study. And this study will obviously also take into consideration the impact of the crisis and will also be looking at good examples of how the sector is actually looking at getting out of the crisis. And I think there's a lot to be learned from each other. That's the European added value. And I think also when it comes to the future, it will be very good to be able to exchange on good practice together. There's the idea to have a theatre forum at the end of the year together with the German presidency. And it is certain that the impact of Corona and how to overcome it and how to turn it into a positive momentum for future building will be on top of the agenda of this conference. And last but not least, you mentioned it, my colleague Susanne Hollmann may join us later if there are specific questions, but we are of course continuing our Music Moves Europe initiative, which consists not only of a dialogue, but also concrete calls. And we are obviously also there looking in how to adapt the current planning that we have into an instrument that would be meaningful when it comes to fighting the impact of the current crisis. So all in all, I hope that you have seen that the Commission has made a big effort of trying to find quick solutions. All of this obviously always under the premise that we have is that we are also acting at a European level, which is not a local, regional or national level. So we will always be looking at complementing a very good practice at other levels. And there will always have to be a kind of European dimension in everything that we do. But we are very much looking forward to further being in dialogue with you as networks and with the NGOs that are working in this sector. We are hoping to be closely in contact now and in the immediate future on, in particular, we can positively look into the future. What needs to be done to look into a more resilient future for the sector and not only look at the immediate relief, which is one thing, but the other thing which I personally find very, very important is bearing in mind what it needs now and how we can together work on the future. Because as all of you said, there's now an awareness how important culture is, and we also hope that this awareness is shared by those that are eventually also looking at the financial envelope of our future actions. And it would be my greatest wish if we could turn this deploring situation into a momentum for culture and into into a day when we will say, now we hope that all of you have understood how important it is that we have a cultural action, a cultural policy, and culture support for culture at the European level.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Okay, so now is Roser Sebastià's turn. You've met her already at the beginning of this digital talk. She's member of the board of Òmnium Cultural, the leading cultural NGO in Catalonia. She has devoted her professional career to the publishing industry, now working in the cultural cooperative business SOM, from which she manages the marketing launches of books, magazines, and cultural events. In Òmnium, she is part of the Cultural Commission and responsible for the VOC project to promote audiovisual production in Catalan language. Roser, your turn.
Thank you, Alex. Well, before these clarifying and interesting speeches, I will try to complement them with the idea of what civil society can do to help cultural industries. First of all, I would like to briefly draw where we are coming from. The 2008 global economic recession took a heavy toll on the arts and cultural sectors, leaving us with a panorama of two extremes. On the one hand, we have the large cultural corporations who make themselves more and more indispensable to the consumers. And on the other hand, we have alternative projects which offer different points of view and cast a critical glance, all of whose existence is becoming more and more fragile with precarious job security. Globalization and the digital revolution have favored majority cultures and hegemonic languages, making it much harder for everybody else to connect with the public, find a space on the spectrum, and not remain in the shadows. In my opinion, this can mean loss of diversity and cultural richness. This situation, which was already dragging on the sector, has pushed us even closer to the edge with the COVID-19 crisis. However, there are some reasons for optimism and to put our hands on the wheel all the harder to turn things around. What have we seen from the creative sector during our lockdowns? Once the states of emergency were declared across Europe because of the COVID-19 crisis, we have all been witness to the generosity and desire to serve of many people in the arts sector. Many artists immediately shared their work for free in an altruistic way to entertain and give hope to the people. But what is the problem? Well, they are lovely and uplifting, but nobody is being paid for their work. And we have no idea when musicians will be able to offer concerts again, when new plays will open, when art shows will start again, and when new movies will be premiered as cinemas reopen. Also, seeing everything for free now online contributes to the myth that all culture is free online. But this is a basic question. Once artists have placed all their art at the service of the population during these trying times, will they later be able to tell people that they now need to stand by their side as artists and support them financially? Well, in front of these circumstances, what can non-profits and NGOs do given the large social basis that we have? I would like to explain 7 concrete actions, some with examples that we at Òmnium Cultural have launched over the last few weeks. Number 1, become a clearinghouse for our cultural information and content. In the midst of numerous initiatives, we have tried to offer a space where everything is organized and which permits the largest number of projects to have visibility and to bring order where there is a saturation of contents right now. In this way, we contribute to the ability of the creative people to reach more people and pass along the message that culture is important for social cohesion and for the mental health of everyone. We are adding value to our cultural patrimony. For example, from Òmnium, we have created a web space where we recommend all kinds of virtual cultural activities and initiatives that are launched by artists, producers, and cultural distributors. With over 100 local VIPs from the cultural sector making recommendations of what to read and what to watch and listen to via our social media. Number 2, call on people to make donations to support cultural work so that they can continue enjoying it in the future. In our case, an example, we have our librerías obertes, that it means bookshops are open, and this campaign calls on readers to reserve and pay for books at their favorite bookshop for collection when the bookshops can reopen. In this way, the bookshops have income now, which will help them survive. It's part of a broader campaign for micro-sponsorship, and with this campaign, people can advance funds so that a cultural project can continue to be developed and then enjoyed by all later on. This concept could be broadened to the walls of music, theater, and festivals, where people will buy tickets now for future events, keeping things going now, so they can enjoy them later. These actions are not meant just as a way to get donations, but we also have a huge communication effort via social media to make people understand the importance of culture. Number 3, we are also lobbying government bodies to provide aid and rescue funds for the creative world. At the same time, from civil society, we complement what governments can do with calls for private donations and volunteers, if necessary, to help cultural projects happen in future. We have already been involved in fundraising campaigns for R&D funds dedicated to fight to the COVID-19 virus, because we know that is the priority right now. But as the pandemic stretches out and impacts on the cultural sector, similar initiatives focused on culture can be developed in the coming month. Number 4, support the digitalization of culture in 2 ways. On the one hand, to find formulas that let us set a price for watching culture digitally that users are willing to pay and thereby facilitate the economic viability of cultural projects. And in the other hand, to make culture more accessible so that all sectors of the population can afford it. As I said earlier, culture is a basic tool for social cohesion, especially at a time when there is a growing risk of polarization among communities with high risk of social exclusion. Number 5, lobbying to reduce VAT sales tax on cultural events. We think measures like that would attract a broader section of the public to cultural events. Our organization and others like us are working hard to this end. Number 6, support new and stable funding for art, scholarships, and prizes. An example from Òmnium, we are working on aid for the audiovisual sector, working in the Catalan language through prizes we offer to audiovisual soaps and programs aimed at digital platforms. Those who are candidates for these prizes tend to be young professionals who are early in their careers, when small amounts go a long way. And not just for the fans themselves, but they are also helped by the press and publicity about the prizes and our promotion of the winners. Helping these emerging professionals represent not just the present, but the future of the arts is our responsibility too. And finally, number 7, urging people to go back to fill the arts spaces as soon as possible. One of the effects of the COVID-19 crisis probably will be a certain loss of confidence among potential audiences about returning to arts spaces. When cultural spaces can open again in some months, how can we best urge people to return without fear or prejudices? It could even be possible that certain time of large-scale events might not be possible for a long time, and some things might need to be scaled down. But it is part of our responsibility to create confidence so that people go back to the cultural spaces and hopefully make people see that their mental health and personal enrichment will benefit from it. Thank you to hear me, and I turn you over to our moderator to start the questions and answers round. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, José, and thank you very much to all our speakers for the interesting views that shed light on a situation that we are all concerned about. At this point, we have arrived to the questions and answers time. Actually, we are running out of time because we were planning on having this session in just 1 hour, but we will extend a little bit more, perhaps 5, 7, 10 minutes in order to answer some of your questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer them all because you have sent many. So we have selected a few of them and we'll try to give you the best of the answers of our speakers. So let's get started with this questions and answers blog. So the first question that we have is for Tere Badia, and it is this: what would you ask the European governments to do to help the cultural sector? I repeat, what would you ask the European governments to do to help the cultural sector?
Well, that's complex. So what would I ask them? So well, it's going to depend also from first to attend their own reality, so the proximity, so what's happening in their country, because sometimes we are looking abroad and we're not noticing that in some countries there's no measures at all yet for the cultural sector. So I think this is a pretty urgent measure that they can take. Of course, they have to make sure, that's for sure, they have to make sure, or I don't know how, it should be a sort of mechanism to make sure that the instruments that the European Commission had set up are financial instruments are also available for the cultural sectors. Again, so the cultural sector is always the last one or the most forgettable one. So I think this should be a priority for the member states and the governments. Of course, another thing that they can do, and this is very, very important at the time where we are now, is to support an increase of the multi-annual financial framework. So the budget for creative for the European Commission and Creative Europe, and to make sure also that culture is mainstreamed across diverse programs. So these are for us the main the crucial topics that they have to address. And of course, so we have as a lot of other networks have launched concrete surveys to see what's happening in the cultural sectors and in the diverse member states. And the most common thing is, of course, the governments should provide basic income, so basic support to cultural and creative actors. Now, it doesn't matter if they are just individuals, they are the most weak agents, actors, but also micro organizations that without this support are not going to be able to survive. Of course, structural support, temporary tax relief for cultural and creative sectors, flexible subsidies, measures to enable cultural and creative sectors to switch to other maybe new platforms, but also give them time as well. So if it doesn't help if you give to support the cultural sector or any sector, but specifically the cultural sector in a very short period. So just give them some time to recover, and I think and to think new ways to work in the field of culture. But for me now, the most urgent thing is also the budget, the European budget, and make sure that the instruments, financial instruments that the Commission has put in place arrives also to the cultural sector.
Okay. Well, the next question is for Ausa, and it goes as follows. What can performing artists do to prepare for the so-called new normal, where massive shows will not be possible, at least for a few months?
Well, I'm just going to be honest. I don't want to prepare for the new normal because I don't want to accept the new normal. However, we certainly have to work and act differently, which is why a network like mine, and I know many other ones are really trying to figure out alternative solutions for their members as we speak, which is why IATM is now entering into this large brainstorm with its entire membership starting on the 19th of May that I mentioned earlier. But if you are able, and now we're talking about thousands of artists that are really in dire situations across Europe, and I think we have to acknowledge that. I mean, there's people that are not eligible for unemployment benefits and so on and so forth. So there is a very huge difference between what the situation is. But if you are able to use this time well, I would say concentrate on your skill, really try to find use of your skill in the most diverse way. Artistic skills are valuable. Find ways of using them. I always give people, when they ask me how they should develop their career, I have 3 words that I give them as advice. Stay curious, be open, share, and listen. These are the 4 golden words in any developmental process, whether it's an artistic one or another one. Then I would say take part in dialogue, seek collaborations, go outside of your comfort zone and think about alternative ways of working within your community or with other communities. And finally, join networks. Networks are a wonderful place to go and discover alternative solutions. ITM has, and one of the things that we did in the last week is that we created what we call a plea to national governments, Rescue the Arts plea. It's on our website. You can find it in very many languages, including Spanish. Sorry, not in Catalan. I would love to have it in Catalan as well. So if I have a volunteer for that, but it's been translated into many languages. And it touches upon some of the issues that Terry was just mentioning, the importance of providing universal basic income for artists. So if you have the opportunity to take part in campaign in your country, wherever you are, do so. Because we have also been discovering really great examples of where it has been working. We've been hearing of campaigns of artists in Greece, in Portugal, across Europe that people have been really getting together and they have been getting some results. My national government decided to, from the plea and campaigns of the artistic community, to create an artistic funding scheme that has now just been advertised, which is going to give hundreds of artists income through the basic artist salary system. This is all due to the campaign of the communities. So, I mean, go out there and fight for your position in society, and while doing it, also take care of yourself and your skills.
Well, so the next question is for Barbara. Will the European Commission propose a special type of fund to support Europe's culture and performing arts severely hit by the pandemic crisis? I think that we've lost Barbara. Well, in the meanwhile, Barbara, can you hear us? I think we are having some. Now we can hear you. Okay, so I will repeat the question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm sorry. But I can be very short because we will be very shortly launching this support scheme for the distribution of performing arts in Europe, and this will be really an instrument for the performing arts specifically. So while all the other support that we can give at the moment goes via our usual schemes, the cooperation projects in particular, we have this possibility now of setting up this fund in this very special situation. And the beauty of it is that it will be also available fairly quickly, and support will be reaching the sector very quickly as well. So we are aware of the precarious in the performing arts sector are in. which would help this sector quickly.
I think we are having some connectivity problems, and I don't know, can you hear Barbara? Okay, if you don't mind, we will proceed with another question with Roser Sebastià. And if we can get back Barbara's connection, we will give her the floor. Okay, Roser, this is for you. How do NGOs like Òmnium Cultural detect the needs of the cultural professional are?
Well, as Osa told before, I think that network between a lot of different profiles in the cultural world is so important. And the organizations like us, the civil society organizations, can be a neutral agent to try to promote that several profiles in the several cultural areas can meet and join and put together ideas, needs, and for us, this is an action of our plan for next weeks. We are trying to speak with everyone. We know it's difficult because it's important sometimes forget competition or rivalries, but it's in crisis times that we need to go together to fix some things, to join creative ideas to change the culture as we know today, probably. But I think our organizations, it's a good space to try to generate that dialogue, and we will work to try to achieve that.
Thank you, Roser. And with this last question, we get to the end of this first digital talk. We are really thankful to our speakers for having been with us. We hope that your ideas and thoughts can help the cultural sector to beat the COVID-19 crisis. Also, thank you very much to our viewers. We hope you enjoyed this first show and stay connected with us, because next month, in late May, we'll have our second digital talk on how the COVID-19 crisis is impacting on the human rights in Europe. Until then, thank you very much and good luck.